Okay, so it looks like we're live. Hey Antonio, how you doing, man?
Not too bad, bro. Not too bad at all. Just taking it one day at a time. What's up? What's going
All right.
on, man?
So the other day, we were in a hangout, and normally, it's like you got a couple people, they have their opinion on one side, and then you got a couple people with their opinion on the other side, and nobody's really budging too much. Pretty much, we're just going back and forth. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy doing that, but what was kind of cool, what you were doing was that you were actually kind of asking honest questions. It sounded like you were asking them because you weren't really sure what the answers were. Like you were trying to learn from other people and stuff. And it was also kind of like playing devil's advocate a little bit too, because I know that you favor kind of the design side. But the questions you were asking were like, what would you say to an evolutionist who says this or that? And I really appreciated those questions, and I enjoyed taking a shot at them. So I think later you were telling me that you had decided at some point recently that you wanted to begin getting a lot more into this topic of evolution and intelligent design. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I've seen you on the internet on Google Plus and in these Hangouts for quite a while, a couple of years, I think, actually. And it's been about a year since I've been on Google Plus, and before that, I was involved, and I saw you around a lot. So I just kind of wondering what kind of made you decide now that you want to get into this and learn a lot more. Like, what was there anything that made you decide you want to do that?
Well, I'm glad you asked about that. I think um, on a basic level, I can communicate in most topics of this particular context of intelligent design evolution. Like I can talk the basics about functionality of DNA and things like this, but when it starts to really get into things like gene transfer and what else, when it starts to get into stuff like uh, how the ATP synthase works and those sorts of things, you just get me like lost really quick. So I just want to just expand my knowledge just beyond just a simple lay, beyond just the mere simple layman. Uh,
Mm.
I wanted to be able to ask, evolutionists more difficult questions because I can ask them about how these changes, like what they, how these changes actually work for what they're putting forth. But that's basically all I can ask at the end of the day. Like, I don't really know how to, like, if they were to tell me something like, um, uh, evolution works over time and like for example, like an example I'm giving a lot is like how we come from our parents and how changes occur in that sort of way. Like I wouldn't really know how to properly address that from the intelligent design perspective. I wouldn't know how to say, okay, how does that compare to what you're connecting with something like Darwinian evolution? So I just want to, expand my understanding just beyond a mere basic level. At least
Yeah,
get to the part to where I'm at least an intermediate. At least an intermediate.
yeah. Well, I think that will be awesome. That's an awesome journey to be on, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how everything develops. I remember a couple of years ago, um, somebody told me that you can really only be like really good at one thing, and I remember thinking about like, well, what do I want to be? What do I want my one
Absolutely.
thing to be? And at that time, I decided, I think I really want to learn a lot about intelligent design. And So I started reading books that I had, but that I'd never really finished, or I'd read parts of them. I started reading them like from the beginning to the end, and sometimes I didn't quite feel like it all the time, but I made that commitment to doing that, to studying that topic, and I also made a commitment to debating it regularly because I think equally important as reading books and getting information is also testing those ideas by surrounding yourself with people who disagree with you. And that's just been an awesome journey for me, and it was just really cool to see somebody else who's kind of interested in going on that similar journey there. Um, and I've been in a similar place, like, and in some ways yeah, I am, but to a lesser extent, like, um, but I mean, when I first started in this topic, there were a lot of different things that I didn't really know how to respond to when it came to evolution, especially like when I was way back at the beginning, like years and years and years ago, like more than 10 years ago when I first even heard of intelligent design. I never really even talked about evolution because I assumed it was kind of an airtight case. So it just seemed like very formidable and complicated and everything. And now I think after doing a lot of the hard work, I can at least recognize a lot of the issues that are at play. And one of the things I noticed is that a lot of people who are really into this topic, especially on the evolution side, in my opinion, has been my observation anecdotally, is that um, they're very much stuck on these old ways of thinking about things. Like, for example, just I think it was just yesterday, um, I made a comment in a post about like, well, we don't really know how evolution works, and somebody um, commented, "Oh, you just have these zeros and ones, and then oh, you duplicate it, and then you add some more zeros and ones, and natural selection selects these things, selects each change." And well, I understand now from a lot of hard work that that's really an old 19th century view of evolution, um, where we thought that one mutation corresponded to one new trait. And now we know that that's not true, that a single trait could require many mutations. Now, I'm talking a little bit too much here, but all of that to say, like, it's really cool how when you put in that work, you can recognize that some of these things, these arguments that seem intimidating when you're first starting out, a lot of it's just all the same stuff recycled. And a lot of people don't know as much as they think that they do. And a lot of people don't realize that they're using very old information, very old arguments. So, anyways, I think it's a really awesome journey that you're on, and I look
Yeah,
forward to participating in that with you.
yeah, I appreciate that, man. Like, if I'm being presented with something like when evolution is put a challenge forth to intelligent design, like one of the examples they'll give is something like, well, intelligent design is Morphin hypothesis. Really doesn't uh, it really doesn't stack up as a theory whatsoever because it doesn't make any predictions. Like, if I'm going to be a proponent of intelligent design and the evolutionists say, well, intelligent design doesn't make predictions, how would I respond to something like that?
Well, I mean, I think there are predictions that design proponents have made, and one of them is about pertains to junk DNA. Junk DNA is just somewhat more modern vestigial argument, um, where the junk is a vestige of the past, and that comes straight from Darwin, the basic idea. And it was ID proponents who predicted that no, this resembles some engineering principles. I think we're going to find that these things are functional. And there were several people who made this prediction. There was, what was the guy's name? Mims, I think. I think also William Dembski made this prediction, I think in 98, if I'm not mistaken. And so
Yeah.
we do have examples where design proponents have made predictions about science, about what we would find in the evidence that have borne out to be true. And the materialist side has been incorrect about that. Then you also have very specific predictions by Jonathan Wells about centrioles and what we will probably find, assuming that these things have been designed, having to do with the different structures that he's hypothesizing exist. So that's something that I think still remains to be seen, how that's going to turn out. There's also predictions about the bacterial flagellar motor and the type 3 secretory system, about which one is ancestral to the other. That's testable, and some of the evidence seems to favor the design view, which is that the flagellar motor is ancestral, which is opposite of the materialist view, since the flagellar motor is more complex. You would think if it evolved, a simpler one would have come first. But some evidence suggests that that's not the case. It's opposite. So I think there are a whole lot of interesting predictions. Oh, and then the fossil record that Darwin predicted would be one way. And I don't know if this was actually a specific prediction or if it's more of a post-prediction on the design side. But the history of life in the fossil record actually resembles the history of the automobiles, of the invention of various kinds of automobiles. There's actually a study done on this recently. It was referred to as a brand new modern Barra's blunder, where it accidentally demonstrated that the fossil record actually exhibits a pattern of design because it's so similar, so very similar to the history of automobiles and the evolution, if you will, of these machines over time. So I think there are a number of examples of predictions and post-dictions and even statistical modeling, as was the case with the automobile example, where you could say that the design proponents actually do make predictions. But I think the more important thing, though, is that fundamentally, people who are just trying to dismiss design based on these kinds of arguments, like, well, you have to make predictions, or it has to be falsifiable, or other things like that, they're just making demarcation arguments. And these things are
Exactly.
very useful. They can be very useful, especially the predictions. They can be very useful, but it's not the only way to do science. I mean, ultimately, what trumps everything is whether you have an explanation that is causally adequate to produce the effect that you're trying to explain. And that's what design has that none of the competing theories has. An
Yeah, I
intelligent
think.
cause.
Yeah, I think one of the things they ask is like, how is the intelligent agent causing X effect on the world? And I don't really
Right.
think we have to know how the how this agent is causing this effect to say that this effect is best explained by an intelligent agent. I don't think we really need to explain how the agent is doing this. I don't see that as a competent objection whatsoever. But what are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't think that's a valid objection at all. And the reason is that, well, let me just talk about what True Empiricism said the other day. Um, he said that intelligence is the mechanism. And when I've heard this objection before, I've kind of pondered, well, can you actually can I make the argument that intelligence is the mechanism? Now I've always just automatically come down on the side that no, you can't really say that mind is a mechanism. After I heard true empiricism make that comment, and then Dr. Mays, I think it was Mays, right? He kind of rejected that. I thought about that. I was like, well, I don't know. Like maybe you can kind of say that mind provides the coordination to produce the effect. So it kind of is a mechanism there. But more importantly, I think what you're getting at is, do we need to even know a mechanism? And I think the answer is absolutely not. There are a lot of things that we have explained without appealing to any particular mechanism. I mean, probably the greatest example would be archaeology. I mean, we discovered the pyramids. We had no idea how these ancient people moved these giant blocks. Many, many tons
Exactly.
each.
Yes.
Many, many tons each block. And there's like millions of these blocks in a pyramid. Millions of them. We had no clue how they did it.
Right. And if you look at the
And
hieroglyphics,
so,
given their more primitive era, if you look at the hieroglyphics that they designed, they have them in this sort of pristine detail, and
yeah, what
how they etch them. Like, how in the world did they do that with the primitive tools they had back then? How in the world could they have accomplished this?
sure. And it's not even that it's so amazing what they did, which it is unbelievably amazing what they did. But even it was just if it was just some kind of mundane thing, like for example, we find stone tools and we have ideas about how we think they may have made them. Not Egyptians. I've moved on to some other civilization. We have some ideas about how they might have made them, but we're not 100% sure. I saw a whole show about this guy. He had this theory that basically you just did one whack on a stone at just the right way, and it would crack off a shard that they would use as the arrowhead, and or as a butcher knife. And it was actually really cool, and it seemed to make a lot of sense. But it was in my mind, I was like, so all this time they found these tools, but they didn't know how that these very simple tools were made. And so the point is like, well, if we didn't know how they were made, and you have to know a mechanism to explain something, then in the world did we ever conclude that human beings made these tools? Or how in the world, if we need to know the mechanism, did we ever conclude that human beings made the pyramids or that they made hieroglyphics if we don't know the mechanism by which they did these things? So,
Exactly.
yeah, you don't need a mechanism to know the kinds of causes that are associated with various effects.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one example that I give a lot is like, imagine a person walking down a path, and to the right of that path, and then they walk 3 yards down the path, and then they see six rocks. They walk 3 more yards down the path, and then they see nine, and then 12, and then 15, and 18, and so on and so forth. Every 3 yards, the rocks increase by three until they get to the end of the path, and then the rocks are increased all the way to 300 every 3 yards. That's happening. Now, we can say this happened by random chance, like somehow maybe those rocks fell into place at the right spots, maybe through some sort of avalanche putting them there, maybe wind carried them there. We could say that that possibly happened that way, or we can say an intelligent agent did that. I mean, I think most people who are in their honest, rational thinking minds would say that an intelligent agent was most likely the cause behind that. Now, we can dig a little deeper into that and say if we posit that an intelligent agent was most likely the explanation behind this, how would they have done that? Would they have physically arranged them by hand them themselves? Did they use a machine? Um, they could have done it in all sorts of ways. We don't even have to know whether they did it by machine or did it by hand. Maybe they did a little bit of both. We don't have to know the exact mechanism and on how they arranged
Hmm.
these rocks to know that an intelligent agent was behind this. So I
Right.
think this idea that you have to have this exact sort of explanation on how that mechanism worked to draw
Yeah.
that back into an intelligent agent is ridiculous.
Well, it's not how we make inferences in science. I mean, it's just not how we do it. It's not how people make inferences. I mean, otherwise you'd have to ignore what you know about the kinds of causes that create these things. Like we would have to discover the pyramid, say, well, I don't know how this could have possibly been built. It's probably going to be a mystery for a while. So until then, I can't say that humans made it. That's absurd. you know but
Absolutely.
anyway, hey Antonio, thanks so much for chatting with me for a few minutes. I have to go, but if you want to invite some other people into this chat, you go right ahead. I'll leave it open for a while for you, okay?
I um, yeah, I took that into account before we even start this whole thing. That we can get a few minutes in. I don't really have to invite nobody. We can continue this conversation another day.
All right, man. Well,
But
thanks. We'll consider this part one, and maybe next time I want to get your thoughts on Dr. Mays from the recent hangout you guys did.
absolutely, I think I'm gonna go over that once again to refresh my memory on everything, and
Hmm.
we'll go from there and have a good conversation.
Cool, cool. All right, man. Well, I'll talk to you later.
All right, no problem, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, all right, bye. Okay, I see that we've got 2 viewers, which is awesome. Really appreciate you guys. All 2 of you chiming in for our very first video on this new channel. Um, well, it was a short one. I hope it was a pretty decent one. I thought it was a great conversation. It was great to talk to Antonio. Usually, he kind of sits in the background in a lot of these videos, but I kind of wanted to bring him up to the front because he was doing something awesome the other day. He was asking questions and he was kind of playing devil's advocate. And I thought that was awesome. And he's on a journey of discovery right now. And I was there just a couple years ago, and I'm constantly on that journey too, but I began it a couple years ago, which it sounds like he's kind of right there at that same point. So it was really exciting to hear about that. But all right, next time, hopefully we'll get a few more minutes in here, and maybe we'll get a few more guests. But until then, have a good one. Bye.